So I hope everybody had a great break. We certainly had a fantastic session on the 100 resilient cities earlier, and we encourage you to continue interacting with our panelists. We've got a nice long session here. We've got just under an hour with no presentations, and we designed it that way because we have strong panelists and because we're expecting lots of questions from everybody here inside the room. So if I may introduce you now to session 5A, which is real estate in China. We're going to be taking the occupier perspective to identify practical factors shaping the Chinese real estate market and also occupier priorities for new solutions. As I said, a fantastic panel, but I can quickly introduce them to you. We're joined in the middle by Jiaming, who's the chairman of the Architectural Society of Shanghai. Thank you very much for joining us. We also got someone who I had the great pleasure of moderating only a couple of months ago, Junjie, who's the president of ECADI, which is the East China Architect and Design Institute. And we have with us also Trevor Harris, who is from the regional office of Standard Chartered, based over in Hong Kong. And we also have Sean Brody, who is from Cushman and Wakefield. Thank you very much all for joining us here. So while the built environment is shaped by the geopolitical context, all actors in this sector, as all of you here in the room know, also play a direct and tangible role. The panel that we're going to listen to right now is going to apply the strategic insights that we accumulated from the first day of this forum to help identify high-level solutions that can now be applied in the Chinese commercial property market, notably in office and retail space. I'm going to be checking my phone for any answers that come through or any questions or any solutions to what you're hearing from on the app. Remember, you can use that space not only to ask questions, but to provide your own insights. All of you, of course, are experts in your own field. And of course, we'll be taking live questions from the floor as well. But perhaps we can start off by talking about the particular characteristics of Chinese investors and their approach. What do you think about investors today at the start of 2017? What would you identify as the hallmarks of where they're at? We can start with you, Sean.
Well, if you're looking at the different property types in China, take office, for example. In many Chinese cities, we have quite a bit of supply coming on stream over the next 5 years. So, for example, in Shanghai, the current grade A stock's about 8 million square meters. Next 5 years, we're looking at a doubling of that supply. So that's going to put quite a bit of pressure on the office market from a landlord's perspective. But having said that, a lot of that supply is, certainly in first-tier cities, going to be coming online in the suburban markets. Downtown, less supply. If you're looking, for example, at a very good quality grade A office located in great locations, so for example in Shanghai, maybe Jing'an, if you're looking at those types of buildings, their current lease-up rate, they're coming into market, some of them at around 60 to 70% leased up. So that's quite good. But the real pressure, as I said, is going to be seen more in the suburban markets. Retail, from an investor's perspective, well, again, you're going to see quite a bit of supply coming into the market as well in terms of retail, because that kind of follows hand in hand with office, given the sort of mixed use project sort of nature. If you're looking at performance-wise, currently, downtown retail is doing quite well. You're looking at about sort of 90 to 95% occupancy rate. Again, it's the situation, what's happening in the suburban market. So 5 years ago, suburban retail, they were looking at high-end brands, for example, going into those projects. And those high-end brands were not really fitting the market. that sort of suburban catchment population. But we have seen over the course of the last few years, a lot of retail shopping owners really getting their act together and changing the sort of tenant mix within those particular projects and bringing in retailers that actually fit the market. But again, talking about the supply issue going forward, there's going to be competition from a landlord to landlord perspective there. On the logistics side, the industrial logistics side, that's actually a good, that's been pretty positive in terms of investor appetite. And that's largely been driven by e-commerce. So we've seen good occupancy rates in major cities for grade A logistics. Looking at sort of second and even third tier cities, just recently we've seen, however, the vacancy rate actually rise, but that's not because of a lack of demand. That's more a case of there's been quite a bit of supply in those markets recently, and those markets are actually coming off a very low sort of stock level. But the take-up is likely to be quite strong in those markets going forward. So that vacancy will certainly contract down in the near future. So yeah, that's a little bit in terms of the sort of commercial market.
Okay, let's take that conversation in a different direction now. And I want to ask Zhang Junjie about the built environment. Obviously is shaped by the geopolitical context. That's what we heard on the first day of this conference. All actors in this sector, as we know, play a very important role. So what are the practical factors that enable a vibrant and sustainable real estate market today?
Yes, indeed, there are different stakeholders that are engaged. So as far as our current industrial trend is concerned, yes, indeed. Yes, actually, there is a big challenge actually they're facing. The context is also quite challenging.
A couple of years ago, we had a lot of development. Sometimes it's a kind of overdevelopment or excessive development. But the government wishes to further advance the local economies. And in this slowdown situations, companies still need to make a profit, in particular for the real estate companies. In the situation where there is some high level of saturation, how to create new needs, how to create new demands, or how to dig the potentials of the existing client out and create new areas, create new markets. This is a very important topic. And now we have moved to the very intensive development. For example, to customize the development, sometimes we need to be very innovative in developing the markets. And meanwhile, we need to have the support of innovative finance. Now we have a lot of innovative finance on top of the traditional ways. Sometimes it's a light asset, and sometimes it's a kind of shared economy concept. For example, we can cooperate with our friends and everybody takes a share so that many parties will get involved in this project and create the future together. So this is a very interesting phenomenon. And sometimes it's very important to follow the national policies like OBOR, and also we need to have a close look at the cluster of the cities, and we need to notice some of very important pivotal points in the clusters of cities. We have to find out those kind of pivotal points. For example, we have more and more mature high-speed railway systems in China, and we can have roads linking cities from a city, and then the cluster of cities will form. And in the future, it's just like in one city. So in the future, we will have different ecological systems for a city. So you have to think about these pivotal points of the city clusters. And in some of the pivotal cities, a lot of companies would like to set up their headquarters, and the economy there will boost. So you need to find out the focus point or the pivotal points of the different interests from the different stakeholders. So on those kind of pivotal points, you can find the common interest from the different stakeholders, and that coincides with the development of the traffic system. A lot of companies would like to set up their headquarters in those pivotal areas, and hotels and commercial facilities and all the supportive functions would like to go there, and then a kind of a congregation effect will come out. This is very interesting.
Okay, so let's pass that question also on to Jiaming. You're the head of the Architectural Society of Shanghai, and I'll ask you more of those specific questions later in this session. But you heard what Zhang Junjie was saying about the necessary conditions to create a really exciting real estate market. Maybe you can take that from the design perspective as well, and tap into your knowledge around today's generation of architects in China. Are they able to support the vibrancy and sustainability of the real estate market by what they create in terms of their designs?
Thank you very much, moderator, and good morning, everybody. This is a very interesting topic. You know, in the past 30 years, China's economy has a round of quick development and urbanization level going up from 17% to 56%. And in China, the architecture industry or architecture market is well developed, so that the architects from the whole world gets very excited about the Chinese market. So in the first 30 years, architects encountered a lot of opportunities, so that so many architects realized their dream on this land of China. And in this process, Chinese architects get mature. They grow up and get mature. Following the question of the moderator, I'd like to respond that now Chinese architects are more and more capable of undertaking responsibilities. Now the market is getting mature, and the developers, the owners, or the whole society pose a higher requirement on the architects and their responsibilities. For example, in the past 2 years, our government would like to further advance the system of executive architects. So it means that architects are not only the designers. Architects should get involved in the whole process, from the planning and all the way to the management, the operation management, so that he or she will be responsible for everything. And by doing this, architects are supposed to come up with a better plan, a better designing for this architecture. And meanwhile, compared with the first 30 years, the whole society or the market have a higher requirement on the quality of architectures. Architects in China should be very sensitive to the functions, to the environment protection. They are getting more and more aware of these kind of requirements. So that's why I believe that Chinese architects will do a better job in the future. And China's investment has gone overseas. The projects has go overseas. That's why I believe that the architects in China will also go outside China to cooperate with the peers all over the world. So that's why the cooperation with the ICS is particularly important. By doing this, we can follow or refer to the international standard, and architects will grow better and further improve their capabilities.
Okay. Trevor Harris is from Standard Chartered. I'm going to ask you to build a bit on that because I know that Sean wants to respond to some of the comments he's hearing so far. So obviously, you are in one of the prime real estate markets in the world. That's where you work from. That's where people come to invest as well. What would you add differently to what we're hearing up here?
I look after the region, so I look after Taiwan, China, Hong Kong, Korea. Each market has its own requirements. Hong Kong, huge demand on Grade A property within Central, and that stock is about 2% vacancy. From the financial markets, and that goes across the region, they all look to downsize at the moment. So we're looking at hub and spoke. So the Grade A, having the prime people in, headquarters, and then back office to a secondary location. And that's not being taken into account within the investment. We're seeing it a bit in Hong Kong. We're not seeing it so much in China, particularly in Beijing. We're having a main market within the center, but the stock outside is not there for us to have the secondary offices. We're happy to be using large offices in the center if the rents were available to us. But the way the rents are going up, particularly in Hong Kong and Shanghai, we're struggling to meet those with the financial crisis that we're still going through at the moment. So we're looking at having that spoke area where we can move out to, but the landlords need to be flexible for us. And going back to the retail side, we're looking at a lot smaller branches than we had before. We used to look at 10,000, 15,000 square feet branches. We're now looking at 3,000 to 5,000 square feet branches, particularly with the digital age.
So much smaller.
A lot smaller, considerably smaller.
I mean, this is what we talked about yesterday here at the forum. Some people were questioning whether there'll be a need because of cashless payment systems and Taobao and Jingdong, JD.com. Will there be a need to really have those physical storefronts, so to speak, for banks and for shops, for other retail as well? So you're also seeing a reduction.
Oh, definitely a huge reduction. Flow through from the customers, but also just people wanting to use ATMs or digital banking itself. You still need the financial people to talk about products that they want to sell or that people are interested in. But a lot of it's done online now, a huge amount. Korea, for example, we have 250 branches in Korea. From a regulatory point of view, we can't reduce that, but we're changing the models. We're doing another 50 this year that will be inside supermarkets or inside retail shops where we have 700 square feet for a branch, whereas the branch before that it's replacing was 12,000 square feet.
I mean, some people are very concerned. They say that the internet, in a way, is squeezing out traditional businesses or the traditional way of doing businesses. But in fact, could it be more inclusive because there are less running costs, so to speak, on the obvious fronts, that more people can therefore be a participatory rather than just an aspirant themselves?
Yeah, and people that go to the branch are going there for a reason. It's not just to get cash out now as it was many years ago. It's, yeah, they're going there, so they go for the experience. And we're looking at experience for our customers, our staff, everybody that goes into a branch or into our offices. So they get an experience when they go in and have a positive outcome from that. So branches are going to be as important, if not more important, because they will have a key function for the business.
A very specific attuned function.
Yeah.
Sean, you've been wanting to add something to what the discussants are saying and what the directions we're taking on this.
Well, just sort of picking up on your point about sort of government policy and following government policy, and also trying to figure out, what the plans are for the future. I think that's also quite important, a quite important process to go through to kind of realize the sort of end goal of a sustainable real estate market with any given city. So looking into, for example, China's 13th five-year plan, looking into city plans as well. So for example, we've got Shanghai. Shanghai's got a 2040 plan to become an excellent global city. And in order to do that, it needs to move up the value chain in terms of its economy. To move up the value chain, it requires talent attraction. So not just talent within, say, Shanghai, but talent from other parts of China. But then what we have to consider also is the residential market, because you've got first-tier cities. So Shanghai, for example, the residential average residential price per square meter in downtown Shanghai is about 70,000 RMB per square meter. So if you've got a graduate from Chengdu University, maybe, looking to come into Shanghai and make Shanghai his or her home, he or she will probably have to, if they're looking at purchasing a property, he or she will probably have to work 5 times longer to be able to afford a home than if he or she chose to stay in their hometown and purchase a home in their hometown. So these are things that cities have also got to consider in terms of attracting the talent, so that talent can then drive a city's economy going forward.
Incidentally, what's that compared to Beijing and Hong Kong, for example, in terms of 70,000?
Yeah, so, okay, as a comparison, let's look at the overall market, okay? So, because I just mentioned downtown Shanghai, but overall market, the average price for Shanghai is about 45,000 RMB per square meter. For Beijing, it's about 36,000 RMB per square meter. And for Shenzhen, it's about 53,000 RMB.
53?
53, yeah.
So it's much more than the two?
It's much more than the two. And that's simply because recently we had less supply in that particular market, and a huge amount of demand, given what happened in the stock market, given the lowering of the reserve ratio, given the lowering of the interest rates, and also given the increase in M2, the liquidity going into the market.
And in Hong Kong?
Hong Kong, well, it's been an expensive market, for a number of years. So I don't see that, changing anytime soon. But solutions for the government, city governments, in terms of this housing issue, would be just to first of all roll out more affordable housing for young talent, but also looking at maybe splitting apartments. So rather than offering apartments that are sort of 90 to 120 square meters into the market, just going the way that Hong Kong has done, Singapore has done, and offering shoebox apartments, much smaller, but very well designed with a greater efficiency in terms of space usage. And then the third point is to look at other types of property within the market. So, for example, hotel. If you've got an oversupply of hotel, then maybe converting that to resi. And the beauty about that is that many of those hotels are actually in downtown. So if you can provide some sort of affordable conversion, then the talent can actually remain in downtown and spend less commuting time. Could even convert office as well into resi as well, but more looking towards sort of grade B and grade C offices that could suffer from the future supply in terms of the grade A office market. So those are maybe some suggestions of how to alleviate that problem in terms of housing affordability.
Okay, let's just go through some, sorry.
Why wouldn't we learn from somewhere like the UK and Germany that had those problems 15, 20 years ago, and they went rent to buy, convert warehouse spaces? Why aren't we looking at other areas that we should be? It's happened elsewhere.
Well, Trevor,
use that experience to develop, and I don't see that the market is taking that into account at the moment.
Trevor, why don't you give us an example of what you think really worked well, 15 years ago? You're obviously from the UK. What were some of the challenges then, for example, and what would you say that could work here?
You look at London, that had huge problems. So people travel a lot further in the UK. When I worked in London, I'd travel an hour and a half to work every day. So a 3-hour round trip on a daily basis. So your suburban area grows a lot further. So you've got to have the infrastructure, going back to your point about roads and trains getting in there, they've got to be there. But warehouse conversions, you see how many warehouse conversions there were all around the dock areas of London. Again, prices then suddenly shot up in those areas. Docklands became a lot more expensive. But there were a lot of social housing, buy to rent, or rent to buy. So you rent, but part of that rent is being paid into paying off a mortgage. So it's a small house, but it goes on, and you might pay it over 10 years. And once you get to 10 years, you then take on a mortgage for that house. But the mortgage is already reduced because you've been paying some of it as you've gone along.
Okay.
Just areas that we could look at of doing that.
Jiaming, I saw you nodding away when Trevor suggested that perhaps we could look to other cities that have experienced similar challenges and yet have been able to find some creative solutions from their existing resources. So you were nodding away at that. I just wanted to hear what you had to think about it.
All right. For this very issue, I believe for each and every one of you, you are pondering over this very issue. Taking Shanghai city as an example, on the one hand, Shanghai sets out to keep the rapid growth. However, there is limited land supplied for construction because 6,000 square kilometers in the area of Shanghai, there is over 50% of that for land construction, for construction purpose. And the commercial cost is also rather high, which you're already aware of. And second, in Shanghai, there are over 25% of construction buildings. Those are idling factories and also storage spaces that are laying idling. So the 25% of the factories and the storage space that is laying idling, which we should have applied to a better use. And like those apartment building for the singles and the small kind of units, we can convert into. Yeah, this is a good idea. And for my part, in super large city, I have an assumption. We do not have to separate their residents from working. Yes, we can integrate the space for both, like living and working Yeah, we can put the two purposes in the same space. So no matter how far it is, as long as there is a rapid railway access, we can address those issues and the problems. So we're trying to make it happen. For example, those community with vigor and vitality.
We've been looking also at the, and I had drawn up some questions here about what our occupiers are asking for in terms of the type and location of new stock, but also is the real estate market sufficiently connected to the wider agendas of both physical and digital infrastructure required by occupiers today? Would you like to speak to any of that?
Well, currently, the situation in terms of what's happening in Shanghai, if you're looking at occupiers, front offices have obviously got to be in the sort of downtown area, very connected to other businesses. Take 10 years ago, the sort of grade A, the office stock was essentially grade A and in the downtown area. So occupiers really had no choice but to locate into these buildings. And they basically put in their back office operations as well as their front office operations. But I think the first sort of good suburban project that was first developed in Shanghai was around sort of 2008, 2009. It was a project, Singaporean developer actually bought a building from Jiaming, the sort of business park, and they sort of reconditioned it and converted it and actually made it into a sort of a grade A sort of business park style office that multinationals were prepared to locate. And they did so. So that was the sort of beginning of the sort of decentralization movement in Shanghai. And that was also good timing because you had the GFC, so you had a lot of corporations, a lot of occupiers looking at really seriously their real estate portfolios and really looking to cut costs. So downtown rental at that time was about average about sort of 9-10 RMB per square meter per day. Back in the suburban area, you're looking at sort of maybe 4 or 5 RMB per square meter per day. So there were savings to be had. Then a lot of other sort of Hong Kong developers, Singaporean developers, but also local developers then also started developing out suburban stock to the amount that we see today. So this has provided a huge amount of options available for both, certainly for multinationals to then shift out some of their back office operations and go suburban. And we've seen this trend, continue, for the last sort of 5 years or so. And still, it will probably still continue. So the stock quality out there in the suburban area is also improving as well. And also the other thing that's improving is the amenities as well. So when the first suburban projects were launched, it was just simply office, but no real sort of retail to back it up. But now we're seeing projects in, say, the Hongqiao Hub or projects in Zhang High-Tech Park, which also are supported by good retail. That certainly helps out in terms of the lunchtime traffic from the office occupiers. So that's certainly something that the big corporations want. And then, of course, we've seen the emergence of co-working space, which is a want from certainly the young innovators and entrepreneurs. So we've seen a blossoming of that also in some of the major cities in China.
Okay. Are there any questions from the app or either from our audience? Do you have any questions yet from the floor? Okay, well, there are from the app? There is something from the app. So perhaps we can put that up onto the big screen over here and see what it is that you're asking. Here it comes. What value do you feel there is for building in green space in the real estate market here in China? That's one of the questions. And Amanda Clark asks, is there recognized value placed on sustainable buildings in China? Is this growing as the market develops? So Junjie, do you want to take that one? Is there recognized value placed on sustainable buildings in China? Is this growing as that market develops?
Sustainability, as a matter of fact, this is something we are encountering as we speak. What do I mean? As we know, since the economic reform started in China in 1978, up to now, it has been over 3 decades along the way. So the development volume is gigantic, but the quality requirement is not well met. We still have a long way to go to increased quality because we focused on quantity of development. Now we have to consider about sustainability. How can we make sure that buildings can continuously play a role in their entire life cycle without too much eco burden? So this is where the transition we're trying to make happen comes in. How can we revitalize the stocking according to the differentiated needs across different regions and users? We need to bring back value to those stocking, which is related to, for example, functional enhancement of the buildings, energy-saving measures we put in place, and to improve the environmental friendliness, etc. So those work people are already doing, especially cover the entire life cycle of the project. In terms of the environmental angle, actually, in many regions or development projects, when it comes to their occupiers, the developers make promises to their occupiers. So how can I put it? They actually meet the very accurate needs of their occupiers. For example, the external environment, the air quality may be a problem, the noise as well, and energy consumption, and garbage discharging, etc. Those are a host of issues we have to count in. So as developers are developing projects, they're trying to integrate those actually needs into their planning and make their projects like a selling point based on providing good services around sustainability. We have the health standards, international standards, and domestic standards for health guarantee for the users and the occupiers. Then indoor-wise, the air quality inspection and testing, and also the indoor air components and ingredients testing to find out about any, for example, non-safe components, whether the indoor air is clean enough, etc. There is testing. Third, testing on water quality. For a city like Shanghai, people really pay a lot of attention to the potable water, whether it is actually safe and healthy for people to drink. We are supposed to be subject to very stringent standards regarding drinkable water for each household. So as the GDP level grows to a certain level, then people pay more and more attention to the residential and working environment we are in. How can we make sure there is better sustainability? So there is, of course, value to it. Those are some of the specific examples I mentioned. When it comes to communities, so for the entire community, how can we reduce noise? And how can we dispose of those garbage in a better manner? How can we create those very livable environment for communities? Yes, they recognize value there around all those. So going forward, with the economic development further, forging ahead, and with the enhanced quality of the living environment around cities, people will recognize more and more values of those sustainability-related things. This is a big trend. So wonderful concepts can be gradually reflected into those actual projects in China. We're already seeing this happen because we have many of our clients, so they already put forward their request about sustainability. So across different cities, different regions with different income levels, gradually, this is a trend that is materializing more distinct in first-tier cities.
这个可持续
All right, sustainability. I think that in China, over the past 15 years, there is a lot of attention paid to the very topic. In the old days, we talked about green building and eco-friendly buildings. So after a decade of continuous attention, I think sustainability and sustainable buildings have become a priority for urban planning. When it comes to urban environment, Mr. Zhang already mentioned a lot about it. I'm not gonna go into more details than what he already mentioned. But buildings-wise, we still have a gap to fill because we are backgrounded on architectural design. Even upon the design stage, we're going to have to consider the entire life cycle. How can we maintain the sustainability of the building throughout the entire life cycle? For example, the residential building, whether the maintenance, the repair, etc., is easy to go about because according to design code, 50 years for service life for one building. But actually, the real use tenure may be over 100 years, right? Therefore, the pipelines may be only as good as 15 years in terms of the service life. You're going to have to replace those pipings every 15 years. Our design, is it easy to replace those pipings, right, every 15 years? So we have to count that in upon design stage. Second, from design to building to property management, we have to build the entire system. This is where BIM comes in. It is a wonderful system tool. So from end to end, covering the entire process, we can pull it off. Because in the old days, small household appliance product, there is that thick of the instruction manual, right? When it comes to the building, after it is built, for users, there is no wonderful instruction manual. This is where RICS comes in because it is very experienced. We can have a wonderful cooperation in this regard. Thank you.
Sean, I have, Amanda's been very busy on that app. But of course, then we're privileged to have the questions that she's asking from the surveyor's point of view, but also from an RICS role as well. So why don't you add to what you've heard there, because I know that you want to build on this discussion. And then I'm going to take some of the other questions that she's kindly offered us over here.
So, just in terms of an add-on from sort of the occupier perspective. So, again, looking at the market here in China, essentially, green buildings 5 years ago, for example, if we're looking at office buildings, occupiers, if they were multinationals, obviously they have their sort of corporate social responsibilities, and part of that is the sort of the green issues related to that. So when they were looking at office space back then, they certainly would gravitate to some of the buildings that had a green badge to it, whether it be LEED or BEAM or China 3-star. Today, it's actually, these occupiers are also taking into consideration their employees as well. And they're actually fitting out their office space, many of them, with, sort of machines that provide better air quality. And that also segues into something that's happening now, but also will continue to happen in the future, and that's health and well-being in the workplace. That's becoming, quite a sort of seriously, debated topic amongst occupiers, because that also affects productivity as well of their employees. If you've got healthy employees, if you've got happy employees, they're likely to work, harder and become more productive. Shanghai, actually, in some respects, we have seen some pathfinding examples in Shanghai of green spaces. There's one particular space in the French concession. It's an engineering company called Glumac, and their space is actually the first space in the Asia-Pacific region to be have the sort of LEED version 4 platinum status, which is quite an achievement. But having said that, going forward, I think for buildings, great. You know, it's very good to go green. It's very good to have that badge in front of your building. But what's really important to take it forward is the quality of property management. So we need property management to really, you know, maintain that plant and machinery and the devices and the sensors, etc., to make sure that you know they're working and they are running efficiently, so that they're doing their job of being green.
Of course, I mean a structure building changes also during a lifetime, isn't it? I mean, the needs change around it in the community. Technologies advance as well. There are new opportunities to upgrade a property. But I know, of course, architects, you know, periodically go back to a property to see how it's conversing with the people using that space. So management, as you said just there, plays a critical role, not only in terms of maintaining the quality, but also making sure that what it was built for and the qualities it originally met are actually living through day to day, aren't they?
But that comes with the architects as well. So it's a complete life cycle of the building. So there's 2 points. One, well building is definitely being looked at. It's the future of where we're going. But you said that building is LEED Platinum. But in what sense? Is it LEED Platinum construction, LEED Platinum fit out, or LEED Platinum FM? There's 3 different versions of it. FM is probably the most important one because it actually that's the life cycle of the building. The PM guys are the glory boys. They do the job, get all the applause for delivering it, and the architect's the same. And then the FM have to run. There's no involvement with the FM companies and the teams that are going to run that building for the next 25 years to make sure it operates. A great example was HSBC main building and in Hong Kong, designed by Norman Foster, still involved to that today with that building, and he keeps on going. I was involved in that building for 5 years, and they spent huge amounts of money to retrofit it after 25 years. But they've looked at it from a LEED Platinum fit out, but also a LEED Platinum FM to give it a complete life cycle. So it's saving money all the time. So it's got everybody involved. And now they're looking at well building as well, which takes the employees into account.
Okay, I just want to quickly go through some questions just to use our last 10 minutes. And I've got about 4 or 5 questions I want to work through. So perhaps one of you each can take one, and maybe we'll start off with Jiaming. Don't need anything long on this, but Amanda was also asking about the huge focus there currently is on new high-rise buildings in China. And she says, given that there is a huge focus on new high-rise buildings in China, what's the opportunity for the second-tier real estate cities in China today?
So as we know, the high-rises are supposed to solve the problems of the high-density cities, to deal with the office, to deal with the residential needs. And of course, it's a symbol of the spirit of a country or the signature of a certain area. Shanghai has limited lands, so that's why we have so many high-rises, the top one in China. But for the Tier 2 or Tier 3 cities, is that always necessary to do a high-rises in those areas? We have controversies from the point of view of academia. But, you know, in the in the center, in the downtown of the cities. Of course, if we have some high rises, it can make the life or business more concentrated and more convenient. And of course, high rises may create some problems, but I think that we are still able to solve those problems. So now you can see it's not only in Tier 2 cities, even in Tier 3 and Tier 4 cities, we have a lot of high rises.
Let's look at another of Amanda's questions, and it talks about what value is there in building. What value is there for buildings in green spaces in the real estate market in China? That was correct, wasn't it? I can't read my handwriting. It's not correct. What value is there in building in green spaces in the real estate market in China?
This is a pretty interesting issue. It's a pretty interesting question. You know, in China, we do not, or in Shanghai, we do not have so many green spaces. And we have a very limited supply of land, in particular for the downtown. In the suburbs of Shanghai, it is still okay. So we will talk a lot about the greenness and the value of green. The value of green is extraordinary for the asset of the property owner, and also for the users, and also for the government and for the people. There should be a long-term benefit. Of course, in the short term, it may cost you something, but in the midterm or in the long term, the reservation of green is the most valuable. I'm not sure if I understand your question correctly.
I want to ask you one more thing, Mr. Zhang. I mean, how do you think we could make urban blocks in our cities today recreational spaces, livable spaces?
Now, in the civil plan of Shanghai, it is emphasized that we want to make the community more active, more livable, and more attractive. This is the spirit of the civil planning. So in the next round of the upgrading of Shanghai's city, firstly, we want to retain the culture, and sometimes we have to find those cultures back, and we need to give a feature to every community and let the root being there. So this is something special to Shanghai, because in Shanghai, it's in particular in the downtown, we have a lot of stories, the memories of the old times. So we want to keep our root there, and also we have to understand that the designing of that block or community must be associated with the function or the users of that community. Who are the residents in this community? Who are working there in the block? What's the age group of those people, and what's their hobby? What's their interest? So we have to think about these kind of issues, and we have to understand that the block or the community is an organic entity. It's not a physical building. It's not a physical building. It's not concrete at all. It's organic entity. So we have different demands, and the demands are subject to changes when time goes. So if the designing does not fulfill the requirement of the community, it will move to the end of their life cycle, and the operation model or the even the houses, the architectures there will get older and older and lose viability, and also we need to bring economical strengths into the community. If there is no economy activities at all, the community will not be viable. So hopefully we want to attract more valuable operational model into the community, considering the position of that community. We want to introduce some more operational models into the community and to satisfy the residents there, meanwhile creating the value belonging to the community itself. So this is a very important topic. And finally, I believe that sometimes we focus too much on the construction of the physical things, but also we need to understand the management of the community is very important. We want to provide sustainable services to the people living there, and also to fully use the potential of that community. So this area are something we may neglect. And another is the artistic components of the community. Sometimes the community need to be active in economy, but also it need to be attractive. It need to be charming and fabulous. So that's why we have to attach a kind of artistic, dimension into the community. So we want to provide more activities like artistic activities or recreational activities, but these understandings are not so common among the communities. And in the future, this should be a very potential area to do some improvements.
I thought we could finish off with this, since we're on a session talking about the Chinese real estate market and occupiers' priorities for new solutions. I mean, we're always talking about green technologies and the advances being made in that. I don't think it's restricted to Jiaming, so anybody can speak over here, but just really in a sentence, when we talk about innovation, it goes beyond the technological innovation. We can also talk about the design and the architectural innovation as well. Is there anything that we should look out for as developers and surveyors and builders here in this room? From the design perspective, from the architecture perspective, what innovations can you share with us, especially since you're all at the cusp of all that?
From a user's point of view, it's got to be adaptable. We're finding so many buildings, particularly some of the older stock, not adaptable, and it cannot cope with new infrastructure that we need to put in to make it usable for us. We've got to look at it as a long-term view. It's got to be adaptable, got to be 25 years' time, is that property going to be what we want now? And going back to your point about the green spaces, we're looking at stuff for the millennials now, but what about the people after that? We're not developing it and not designing it for the next generation of people. So there has to be the adaptability in the market, and we're not seeing that in the stuff that we're getting through and the stuff that was there previously. So we've got to look and design it for the future, not for the immediate.
So, yeah, I mean, just following on your point, we also need to create space because it was mentioned earlier in a session, we're going to have 4 generations because we, working out of an office space, because we've got people who are living longer and people working longer. So sure, we're going to have we're having the millennials coming into the workspace, but we've got to adapt the workspace for that generation. But we've also got to, as they grow older, your point, younger generations coming in. We have to create space that is great for the youngest of that generation, but also the oldest of that generation.
Yeah.
I want to emphasize one point. Innovation is not for innovation. the purpose of innovation is not for innovation. The primary function of architecture is for use. This is the primary function of architecture. So the architecture may exist in the world for example, in 100 years. So in every different times, the architecture must fulfill different requirement. So that's why the architecture must be adaptive. And also the protection of the historical buildings. The best way to protect the best building is to use that. Otherwise, you are sending the old houses into the museum. I don't want to send old houses to the museum. I want to put that into use in the new times. So the best protection is to use. This is my viewpoint. And also you need to consider the local feature, the local characteristic, because the building, just like a plant, is cultivated on this land. It is associated with the culture, the humanity on this land. So it is a challenge. It is a test for the capability. I believe that the architects now basically have this kind of understanding.
That brings to a close a really great panel. And I want to thank everybody here who made it so, from Trevor Harris and also Jiaming and Zhang Junjie, and of course Sean Brody. And the room next door has been looking at the real estate market from a slightly different angle, but this was ours from the occupier perspective.